Hello guys, and this is Scott here, and today we're going to do another one of these historic videos, this time of the very wet and very stormy winter of 2013-2014. Now I'm sure a lot of you remember this winter because it is fairly recent and it was notable for some very deep Atlantic storms and some very severe flooding that occurred on the Somerset levels and in many coastal areas. Now before we start, I'd just like to say that many of the charts that I'm using on this come from wettest.d. They have an archive of charts going back to January 1871, can you believe? And also many of the facts and figures are coming from Trevor Harley's personal weather website. And that's a fantastic resource. It has monthly weather for monthly periods going back to the Dark Ages in some cases, so it's a brilliant resource, and I'll leave the links to those two websites in the description below. So let's get on with the historic video. So we're going to start on the 25th of October, so a bit before winter, because actually at the end of October 2013 we actually get a brief taster of what's to come through the winter. We get the St. Jude storm during the latter days of the month. So there we are on the 25th of October, and we actually have a bit of a late season Spanish plume there. So that actually brings some heavy thunderstorms through the 25th and into the 26th. But then as we move into the 27th of October, you can just about make out that we've got a developing low pressure system out in the mid-Atlantic, and that develops into the St. Jude storm. Now it doesn't look like much at the moment, but it intensifies rapidly, and by the time we get to the 28th it's in completely over the country, and this brings some very heavy winds. In fact, we report 75-mile-an-hour gusts over most of mainland Britain. And it also fells several trees. Now, for the UK actually, this storm wasn't disastrous. In fact, it was much worse for most of Central Europe, this. But as I said, it just brings a very brief taster of what's to come through the winter. Then on the 29th, it's cleared off into Scandinavia. Now we're going to skip ahead to the start of winter, so now we're on the 1st of December 2013, the start of the meteorological winter, and we actually have high pressure over the top of us. Now this month actually comes after quite a cold and anticyclonic November, and it has a CET of 6.3 degrees, which is actually slightly milder than the November it just followed. Now 6.3 degrees for December is a very mild month, and I think it's the mildest since 2006, so it is definitely a very mild month, and it's also one of the stormiest Decembers on record. And to also prove even further how mild it was, I actually recorded no air frost at all during this month, just because of the Atlantic weather. Now throughout all of the winter, in fact, I only record 5 air frosts, but again it just shows how mild this winter was. So there we are on the 1st of December with high pressure over the country, and really that just stays there through the first couple days to the 2nd and into the 3rd. We've got it there. But by the time we get to the 4th of December, you can actually see that we've got some signs of development around Iceland. Now as we move into the 5th, that low pressure system moves to the northwest of Scotland. Now, during the day on the 5th of December, that brings very strong gale force winds across most of the northern half of the country. But as we go overnight 5th into the 6th, this storm undergoes explosive cyclogenesis, and it actually brings the worst storm surge to most of the UK since 1953. Now, it was worst on the eastern coastline near the centre of that low pressure, but also many parts of northwest England actually suffered quite badly from this. And I actually have a couple pictures actually of this storm surge. There we are. A house is completely fell off a cliff there just because the height of the waves just knocked it clean off the cliff. and this I believe is in Hemsby in Norfolk. So quite extensive damage there. And then another one of a street that was completely flooded by the sea in Great Yarmouth, and several inches to several feet of water there across most of the street. I'm sure that was quite a miserable night for these people. And actually the heights of the storm surges are actually very high indeed. We record a 5.8 metre surge in Imington, a 4.72 metre surge in Dover, a 4.2 metre in Herne Bay, and a 3.43 metre in Cromer. There we go again, just another picture of a completely flooded area in Norfolk. There we go, water right up to the top of the signpost nearly. But as we move into the 7th of December, that clears away, and we actually bring this high pressure back for a brief period of time. So it does bring a slight time to recover for those areas that did suffer. So that high pressure stays there as we go through the 8th and into the 9th and the 10th of December. But actually there around the 10th you can see that the winds are actually going very far south, I mean even into the tropical Atlantic. So we actually get a very mild push there around the 10th and 11th of December. But by this point there are signs now that it's going to start breaking down and the true colours of winter are really going to emerge at this point. Because as we go through to the 12th of December, you can see that we have all of those purple colours coming off the Canadian seaboard and into the Atlantic. Now that is indicative of some very cold air at 500 HPA, and in fact that's the polar vortex. And whenever you see the polar vortex in the Atlantic, it's a sign of some very stormy weather to come. So they're essentially, we're just setting up the ingredients for that really stormy period in the end of December. Because by the time we go to the 13th, you can see that that high pressure is being pushed away from the UK now and into most of Central Europe. And we're slowly coming under the influence of Atlantic air, as we're developing quite a severe storm to the south of Greenland there at 950 millibars, which is very deep. And as we go through to the 14th, we're completely in a westerly flow there, the high pressure's moving away. As we go to the 15th, we actually get quite a mild day on this day as well. I think I record 15 degrees on this day. So it was sort of the last period of calm before the true Atlantic onslaught begins. Because there we have a 975 millibar storm getting ready to move in. And that sweeps past us overnight into the 16th of December. And on the 17th, you can see then again we've got another deep storm getting ready to strike us in the mid-Atlantic, and that moves in on the 18th. Same time on the 18th, we've also got another storm to the south of Greenland. As we go through to the 19th, this brings some very severe gales to northwestern Scotland. In fact, it brings, I think it's like 90-mile-an-hour gales to northwest Scotland. So it really causes disruption, this storm, especially since we're in the run-up to Christmas now on the 19th of December. Many people are starting to travel around to get where they're going for Christmas, and this storm really affected that travel period. And then as we go through into the 20th, that storm clears off up to Iceland, but again those purple colours are in the Atlantic and we're developing another storm to the south of Greenland, and that sort of sweeps a bit more at a distance on the 21st. But notice over the country we've just got some very tight isobars, so we're under some very strong westerly winds there, so it's still very windy. And then on the 22nd, those winds just intensify. By the 23rd of December, we actually start to get a deep Atlantic storm developing, and this is actually one of the more severe ones of the entire winter actually. As we go through Christmas into Christmas Eve, that develops into a very deep storm. Look at that, 940 millibars. And this charts at midnight on Christmas Eve. And as the day progresses, we actually record a barometric pressure of 936.8 millibars at Stornoway, which is the lowest pressure since 1886 in the UK. And in fact, if that was dropped another 5 to 10 millibars, we'd be talking about the lowest pressure ever in the UK. So this is a very exceptional storm there. Even then, as we go through into Christmas Day, it moves to the north of Scotland. Look at that, 935 millibars there. But actually, for most of England and Wales, actually, Christmas Day wasn't a bad day. The isobars are slightly wider there, so we do get a period of some calmer weather. And as we go into Boxing Day, we keep that calmer weather. But again, in the mid-Atlantic, we've got another storm getting ready to develop, and as we go into Boxing Day night and into the 27th of December, that moves in, and again, some very, very tight isobars on that. So again, we bring 80, 90 mile an hour gusts to Scotland and northern England. Again, the 945 millibars again. When you look at these charts, it's not hard to believe that this was the stormiest December on record. Then on the 28th, that clears away, and we go into a slight bit of a respite at this point as we go into the 29th. The isobars widen, so we get a bit of calmer weather here, which is good news for some places that have had a massive onslaught of wet and windy weather. But it doesn't last, because as we go into the 30th, again, we leak those purple colours into the Atlantic, and we start to develop more deep storms into the Atlantic. Now these are quite slow moving, so even as we go into New Year's Eve, they haven't quite made it to us. So New Year's Eve is a calm day, but as we go through into the new year, those are going to strike us. So there we go, on the 1st of January 2014 we have a deep Atlantic storm out in the mid-Atlantic, and January 2014 comes out with a central England temperature of 5.7 degrees, which again is very mild for January. Again, I think this is the mildest January since 2007. And it's also the wettest January on record. Now, December was notable for its wind, but January is actually more notable for the heavy rainfall that occurs. And there's actually a very big reason why this happens, and it develops around mid-month. So there we go, on the 1st of January, and we're starting to bring another deep Atlantic storm into Scotland. As we go through New Year's Day and into the 2nd of January, that strikes us. But again, on the 2nd of January, even as that storm tries to move out of the way, we have yet more deep Atlantic depressions getting ready to develop. As we go through into the 3rd, we bring another very deep storm in 955 millibars there. And that really brings some damage to Wales, in fact, this time. And I have a picture of a railway, I think it's the Cambrian Railway in West Wales, and this was completely smashed to pieces by the sea. So look at the track all completely buckled, and the sea wall has just been broken apart and flung across the track. It just shows how strong those waves are because of the wind. Again, the white seas just indicate it all, and that was from this storm on the 3rd of January. Then as we go into the 4th of January, we keep some very blustery conditions, in fact, as that storm moves to the north of Scotland. But then by the 5th of January now, this storm really caused some tension and some fear, because normally you would expect storms to develop as they move across the Atlantic. Now, when they get towards Britain, they usually peak in intensity. But look at that one there, 935 millibars, and that's still out in the mid-Atlantic. So this really caused some problems, because we thought, a lot of meteorologists thought that this was going to intensify further. Which, if it did, it would have caused some monumental damage actually, this storm. But luckily it doesn't, because as we go through into the 6th, the central pressure of it actually rises slightly. It's still a very deep storm at 950 millibars, but the central pressure rises, which means that the storm isn't as damaging as it would have been. Now, it still does quite a lot of damage, but thankfully it didn't do as much. And again, as I said earlier on in the video, the heavy rain that is produced by these storms is really causing some concern now along the Somerset levels. And then we have a picture on the 6th of January of parts of Somerset just completely flooded by the heavy rain. You know, for us weather enthusiasts looking at that picture, we think what an interesting winter, but sometimes, you know, we have to think of the misery that was caused by this winter, and actually it's only going to get worse, I'm afraid. And there, again, another picture on the 6th of January of some huge building-sized waves approaching Aberystwyth, I think this is. So, and this storm actually completely smashed the promenade on Aberystwyth seafront and really caused a lot of damage. So again, just showing why interesting weather isn't always actually good for us all, really. So there we are on the 7th of January, and that storm is moving to the northwest of Scotland. It's still producing heavy rain this day actually, but the worst of the winds in fact have now passed. Then by the 8th we actually produce one of the few attempts in this winter to turn the pattern more cold and settled. As you can see, the Azores highs pulled out well into the West Atlantic, and it's actually attempting to ridge with that small high over Greenland. Now for a time that shifts the isobars there on the 8th of January into the northwest, so we get a brief spell of cooler weather and drier weather, but it's only a day thing. And the reason why it doesn't last is because look over the Canadian seaboard again. We've got those deep purple colours, more cold air, moving out into the Atlantic, the polar vortex, as I said. And this again is going to fuel a very deep Atlantic storm. And as we go through into the 9th of January, we're developing lows to south of Greenland, and that completely flattens that ridge being made by the Azores high. So we're under a slight low pressure there, so we're getting rain on this day. Luckily no wind at this point. But as we go through to the 10th of January, we're bringing another spell of wet and windy weather into the country. And again in the 11th, this is more rain at this point. In fact, not so much wind, as the isobars are much wider, as you can see. Then on the 12th of January, we actually bring in the entire winter a slight transient ridge of high pressure that builds in, and this was a welcome relief this day because the winds are very slack in that, and it does bring a day just for everyone to sort of catch the breath during this winter. But it doesn't last, because as we go through into the 13th, we've got another deep low developing out in the Atlantic, and that brings more copious rainfall and again some wind to the north of Scotland. On the 14th again we keep the rain over the country, and into the 15th again another 965 millibar storm bringing more rain and more wind. And that moves in on the 16th again and into the 17th. And this is actually around the 17th, 18th of January we can actually see what made this month so wet, because we're actually developing heights over Scandinavia. Now for a lot of winter lovers, this actually sort of stirred up excitement, because the question was if it was going to move in and turn the winds into the east and finally cut off the Atlantic. But this Scandinavian high is actually more of a burden, because what it does is it sits over Scandinavia and actually blocks the Atlantic system over the UK. So essentially the weather fronts stall over the UK, which just makes us even wetter than we already were. So there on the 18th and into the 19th, that low pressure system's just stuck there. So we have a weather front strung out across the country, and this is producing copious rainfall. And again into the 20th of January we keep that low pressure there. into the 21st we bring another one in from the Atlantic. Then by the 22nd actually, this is where we start to get the second attempt to turn the weather colder. As we can see, that Scandinavian high is trying to inch towards the UK. Now this is a very slow process, but as we get towards the end of the month, it does attempt to make a move. So we're on the 23rd, and we can actually see, in fact, that the Azores high is trying to pull out into the mid-Atlantic. So we are showing signs, in fact, that the weather could turn colder. There we go on the 24th. It tries to move back to Spain a bit there, but it doesn't last long, because actually this low pressure that comes in on the 25th, another deep storm there, 955 millibars, actually helps to push the Azores high out into the mid-Atlantic. So there we are. And actually this day as well, on the 25th, was actually very interesting, because we had a thunderstorm develop over North Wales around mid-morning. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and what this done was this thunderstorm linked up with a cold front and produced a really intense squall line, a really intense winter squall line that crossed the country during the early afternoon. And it produced a lot of lightning. In fact, we have 1,754 lightning strikes recorded that day from the squall line that gradually made its way south and southeast. Then as we go into the 26th of January, we bring another deep storm into the country, and that really becomes a main feature on the 27th. But once again, notice how the Azores high is moving out into the mid-Atlantic, and that Scandinavian high is actually attempting to move to the north of us. So despite the rain and wind on the 27th, by the 28th you can see that that low pressure is actually starting to sink to the south. Now at this point, the hopes of many winter lovers are really going up, because at this point we're thinking that we could be in for potentially a cold February. Now that looked very plausible at the moment, because as we go into the 29th, we can see that we actually get quite a lot of blocking over Scandinavia and to the north. In fact, an 1,045 millibar high over Scandinavia, and the Azores high is now out into the East Atlantic, and those low pressure systems are sinking to the south. And by the time we get to the 30th of January, there we turn the winds into the east for the briefest of moments. Now, as good as this looks, unfortunately it doesn't develop into anything more, because again we've got those purple colours leaking out into the Atlantic, and this again starts to develop a very deep storm despite all the blocking that's around us. So then as we go into the 31st of January, we're moving another deep storm in very slowly, and that's starting to push on the block over Scandinavia. Now on the 31st of January we still have quite a chilly day. In fact, I think this was actually my coldest day of the winter. In fact, I didn't get below about 4 degrees this day. So, 4 degrees is pretty mediocre for winter. So again, it just emphasises how mild this winter was. But it doesn't last, as I said, because as we get to the 1st of February, we're bringing that extremely deep storm into the country. I think that's a 940 millibar storm there. So we bring more copious rainfall in on the 1st of February. Now, what a month February 2014 was, because it has a CET of 6.2, which is a very, very mild figure for February. And it's the most cyclonic month ever recorded. There was not a sniff of high pressure at all this month, not at all. England and Wales record 213% of their average rainfall because of this, so over twice the normal rainfall. And this really just finishes off the winter of 2013, 2014. And just when we thought it was going to get cold, in fact it gets even milder, and it gets even wetter, so it gets even worse than it's already been. So, as we go through into the 2nd of February, that storm that's to the west of us moves to the north of Scotland, and now this brings some very severe wind to the north of Scotland. In fact, I think we get 70-mile-an-hour gusts on this day. Now, that's moving into the Scandinavian high, so notice now how it's retreating into western Russia, and at the same time the Azores high is moving back over towards Spain, and this completely finishes off the chances of any cold weather. So as we go through to the 3rd of February, the winds shift round into the southwest, and we have yet another deep storm developing in the mid-Atlantic at 965 millibars, and as we get through to the 4th of February, that starts to affect us. And again on the 5th of February we bring another exceptionally deep storm in 950 millibars with some very tight isobars, and in fact this one crosses England and Wales, so this brings the worst of the wind to the south this time. And as a result of that we record some massive waves in Cornwall. Oh yeah, I'm not exactly sure of the town in Cornwall, but we have white water washing right up the cliffs and into the village. Just a very dramatic photo there. Again, just emphasising how severe this winter was for wet and windy weather. On the 6th of February, that starts to move away into Scotland. But again, those purple colours, the very cold air at 500 HPA, the polar vortex, as I said, is moving into the mid-Atlantic once again. So what's that going to do? It's going to fire up more deep storms. So as we go through to the 7th, we have another one developing to the south of Greenland. And that one hits us on the 8th of February, and again, this is a very severe system. I think this one falls to 940 millibars on this day and brings more rain to more copious rainfall and more very severe wind to England and Wales. On the 9th that moves to the north of Scotland as the isobars ease slightly, but again it's still very blustery. And then on the 10th of February we bring a more sort of rainy low pressure in as opposed to a windy low pressure. And then on the 11th we actually develop quite an interesting pattern, because one of the reasons why this winter was so stormy was because, as I said, the very cold air is being pumped off the Canadian seaboard into the mid-Atlantic. Now at this point the Atlantic's actually cooled significantly, so on this day I actually get a very heavy snowfall during the evening. Now granted it only lasted for about 20 minutes. This was the only snowfall for me in Manchester of the entire winter. Now for some this winter was completely snowless, but as I said, we get quite a bit of snow on this day in northwestern areas. But then as we get into the 12th, you can see that to the south of the main low, we have a 975 millibar storm. Now, over the course of February 12th, this undergoes once again explosive cyclogenesis. So, as we go through into the evening hours of the 12th, we get some very severe winds. Now, this one particularly affecting my area, and in fact the Met Office actually issued a rare red warning for wind this day for northern and western Wales and parts of northwest England. Now this day I was under the amber warning, and because of this I actually went out and made a video of this storm, so I'll leave the link to that video in the description if you want to see it. But this was for me the worst storm of the winter, and this one particularly infected Wales, northern England and southern Scotland on the evening of the 12th of February. And there it is on the 13th as it starts to clear this area at 960 millibars. Now it's not as low as many of the storms, it's not got as low of a central pressure as many of the storms over this winter so far, but because I think it's because of the isobars being tighter on this one, it produced some very severe winds. I think I got 110 mile an hour gusts down apparently there were 110 mph gusts down on the North Welsh coastline. But yep, on the 13th that's moving away, and as we go into the 14th, Valentine's Day, we develop another deep storm to the southwest of the UK, and that one moves right over the top of us on into the 15th of February, and this again brings more severe wind for the south this time. So again we're getting more copious wind and rainfall where it's really not needed. So by this point the Somerset levels are really in a state of emergency at this point. And then as we go into the 16th, again more low pressures are forming out in the Atlantic, but they become a bit more slack at this point, so we more just get rain at the moment as opposed to wind. So there, as we go into the 18th, we actually get a 1000 millibar storm in, which is absolutely nothing compared to what we've just had. But this brings more rainfall. Again into the 19th we develop this southwesterly flow, so we get another very mild push of air this day on the 19th of February. Again on the 20th we're developing another storm in the Atlantic, and that passes by into the 21st of February. Now this one more affects Shetland and the Faroe Islands. I think that's how you pronounce it, I think. But yeah, this one more affects the far north as opposed to the south. But again, the rainfall affects the south. Again, as we go into the 22nd of February, we've got the deep blue colours in the Atlantic. These develop into the purple colours again on the 23rd. And we're bringing more low pressure into the country. And this just keeps going throughout the rest of the month there, 24th into the 25th. And then by the 26th, we're again leaking those purple colours out of the Canadian seaboard. So to the south of Greenland we've got another exceptionally deep storm developing, and that one more brings rain again this time, as well as slowly approaching us through the 27th and into the 28th. Now, did spring bring an end to it? Not at first, because it carries on as we go into the start of March. So there we are on the 1st of March, we have another low pressure system to the north of us, and more storms waiting in the wings in the Atlantic. So there we are on the 2nd of March, and we have a 970 millibar storm getting ready to move into the north of Scotland, and that one moves in onto the 3rd of March. Then by the time we get to the 4th of March we finally start to see signs that this winter is giving up, because even though those purple colours are leaking into the Atlantic again, as we go through into the 5th, the jet stream, which is indicated by the black line, is starting to inch further northwards. So just as these storms get ready to strike us, they get close to us, but they just miss us as we go through into the 6th. And again the jet stream shifting farther north. Into the 7th again, the jet stream moving ever north, and finally by the 8th and the 9th of March we bring high pressure into the country, and that's where the very stormy winter finally draws to a close. Now this day on the 9th of March 2014 was actually a very pleasant day. In Manchester I got up to 17 degrees, and parts of the south actually got up into the low 20s, which is brilliant weather for early March if you ask me. And also this day was, as you know I do time lapses on this channel, this was actually the first day I ever time lapsed. It's the Spring Day 2014 time lapse, if you want to go and see that one. I might link it in the description as well. But that's where the winter ends. As I said, it was the wettest winter on record, and it finally comes to an end in March. So thanks for watching this historic video, and again if you have any suggestions for some of these videos, please leave them in the comments section below. I'd be happy to look at them. But thanks for watching this time, and I'll see you guys soon.